Hi, and welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And this is Indian Point Blackout Week. And so I'm having guests on the podcast to talk about the closure of the Indian Point Energy Center in Buchanan, New York. And I'm pleased to have as my guest Mayor Theresa Knickerbocker from Buchanan. Mayor, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thank you.
So, Mayor, I didn't warn you, but I have people who come on the podcast to introduce themselves. Now, I've given people your title, but if you don't mind, you've arrived at a dinner party, imagine, and you just arrived, you don't know anyone there. If you don't mind, explain who you are.
Hi, I'm Mayor Theresa Knickerbocker from the great village of Buchanan in New York. We are the host community of the Indian Point Energy Center.
And how long have you lived in Buchanan, Mayor?
I've lived here my whole life and on the same street. I'm fourth generation here. My mom, her brothers and sisters were born in the house across the street from where I live today.
So you're attached to this town?
The roots run very deep. I do have a second cousin who is fifth generation here. It's a great community. It's, you know what, it's a good community for the people who are retired to live here. It's a safe place to live. Also, what we're seeing is an influx of younger families. And so it's a great place also to raise your family here, your children. It's still small town USA.
So the Indian Point Energy Center stopped producing power on April 30th after 56 years, if memory serves, of producing electricity. What's the mood like in Buchanan today?
It's Friday was a really sad day. It was tough because you know what? We have been the host community for so many years, since 1962. Unit 1 was one of the first commercial nuclear power plants within the country. So we were always known as one of the smallest communities with power plants. In the end, we had 3 nuclear reactors on the property at Indian Point Energy Center. So on Friday, I did a rally. It was for twofold reason. One, it was historical. It was an end of an era. So we had people speak. There were other elected officials there. There were some of the employees that spoke. Some of the union members spoke. So it was just, especially, I think, to thank the employees. These people are just unbelievable, very dedicated, and a lot of pride in how they ran that plant there. So it was to thank them for their dedication and professionalism and safe operation of Indian Point.
Why did Indian Point close?
Indian Point closed. There were several reasons, I feel. There was several anti-nuclear groups that I believe stoked up the nuclear fear, that Indian Point was this big boogeyman that was going to blow up and kill us all. And if people really understood how nuclear worked, that in fact is not the case. And like I said before, I was on the board in the 90s and I would go to the NRC meetings and
sorry, you were on the board of the Nuclear Regulatory
No,
Commission?
I was on the board of the Village of Buchanan in the 90s.
Oh, I see.
I was
Okay.
on for 2 terms. Then I took a break and then I came back in 2009. But when I was on the board in the 90s, the village board, I would go to the NRC meetings.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission meetings, they would have their annual meetings. And, you know, it kind of started back then, all the anti-nuclear. And at that time, honestly, I was on the fence about nuclear. But after going through this closure, since the closure announcement, seeing how this affects the community, how it affects the employees, you know, there's 1,000 people that lost well-paying jobs. So I guess we become who we are through our experiences. And I have become now, and I know my anti-nuclear friends in the community are not going to be happy, but I've become very pro-nuclear.
And yet these groups, you alluded to them, and one of them, I'm going to call them out. I've been calling them out. The Natural Resources Defense Council is a very powerful group. Their budgets are annual budgets in the 6 figures, and you're saying that they were stoked the nuclear fear. And how did they do that? Why I guess why did they do it, and why were they so successful?
because they're very organized. There's also River Keeper in our area. There's Clearwater. They're very anti-nuclear. They feel that renewables should replace Indian Point, which, you know what, nobody is against renewables. None of us are against renewables. If they work, fantastic. So this is the new wave. But to close a nuclear power plant, zero carbon emissions. So the people that are environmentalists, zero carbon emissions. To close that and have Indian Point, their 2,000 plus megawatts replaced by gas-fired plants, I'm missing how that's good for the environment, because those gas-fired plants are going to spew toxins into the air. So I know we're talking about renewables, but we're not there yet. Indian Point 3 still had a lot of life left to it. I don't know if you know, Robert, but Indian Point 3 set a world record, 753 days of continuous operation. Let me say that again, 753 days of continuous operation before it shut down on April 30th. So I just think that it was premature for the plant to close. I think it had a lot of life in it. And that's another part of the sadness. But to be replaced by things that are not good for the environment, I think it was just premature.
And so you mentioned the environmental groups, and you said, and you use that line, stoking nuclear fear, and that's been the stock and trade of these anti-nuclear groups. I don't call them environmental groups anymore, because I call them, quote, green groups, because they cloak themselves in green. But what the policies they're promoting to me seem the antithesis of environmental protection, because if they tried to replace Indian Point with renewables, they're going to require a massive amount of land. And that's
absolutely.
Have you followed the issue of renewable energy siting in New York? From everything that I've read and reported on, it's very difficult, is it not?
And you know what? And another thing, I'm understanding in upstate New York, the farmers are struggling. The farm business is very tough. It's not an easy business. And I'm understanding that there's acres that are used, and the farmers are getting paid maybe a couple of $1,000s an acre. We have 240 acres, the Indian Point Energy Center, 240 acres of prime real estate on the Hudson River. Absolutely beautiful. And I am totally against putting any type of either the windmills or any type of solar panels there. And what you would need, the property you would need to replace Indian Point. So maybe someday in the future, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20 years, I don't know. But at some point, renewables might take over. But let's also remember about renewables, the subsidies that go into them to make them viable. So what I'm saying is renewables might be the future, but we're not there yet.
So then let's talk politics. And I understand, and be blunt with you. You're in a kind of a sensitive situation. You need help from the state, and yet the governor was involved in this decision. And so I'm not expecting you to bash Governor Cuomo, but he had a role here, did he not?
Yes, there were three. We call it the three men in a room. There were three people that made this decision to close Indian Point that were in part of the suit. So it was Governor Cuomo, it was Riverkeeper, and it was also Entergy.
And tell me about Entergy. Were they a good? What were they like in terms of Buchanan and surrounding communities? How were they supportive? Were they a good corporate citizen for the local community?
They were very good corporate neighbors. And one thing I will tell you about Entergy, I did have the
so there's nothing for you to, they're gone now. So it's not like there's going to be some. So if they weren't good, I'm
going to tell you the truth. I've had the opportunity to work with them. I will tell you, and there's no benefit in this for me for telling you this. I'm telling you the truth. So since I've been mayor since 2014. and they have been very good to work with. If there ever was an issue, if there was anything that had to be done, they were always very good. The maintenance, they kept up on maintenance. They ran the plant safely, and I will get pushback from my anti-nuke people, but they ran that plant safely. I was able to go into that plant. As a matter of fact, I had the opportunity the day before the plant closed to do a final tour. And I want to tell you, just the attention to detail, it's spotless, spotless. And you know what? And one of the things I will tell you, I have never worked in a nuclear power plant, so I don't have that experience. I have no nuclear background or education, but I've learned a lot. But then again, I can also go over to the anti-nuclear people. They neither have had the education. There's no people with nuclear degrees. There are no people that have worked at nuclear power plants. So, I speak from what I see. But they were a very good neighbor, Entergy. Not only, they were our largest taxpayer, they were our largest employer in our community, but also they were a generous company, and we're never going to see this again. Not only for the Village of Buchanan, they supported Buchanan Day, but they also supported other things in the community, the library, the local library, the local school, Peekskill Rotary, Guiding Eyes for the Blind. I mean, I can go on, and not just in our community, throughout Westchester County. So with their grant program, they were very generous. And that not only is the Village of Buchanan going to hurt, but you're going to have all these organizations now that don't have this funding anymore. The Peekskill Hospital, the Hudson Valley Hospital, they've donated a lot of money to them over the years. So this is something that also is going to be missing in our community.
So let's talk about Buchanan. I know it's a small village. The population, remind me of the population numbers.
Approximately 2,300.
And your budget for the village is about $6 million, if that is memory.
It's over 6 million. It's close to, with the water budget, it's about 7.
And so what will the closure of Indian Point mean for the Village of Buchanan in terms of lost taxes?
Well, we're, looking at losing half of our revenue, but fortunately, since the announcement of January 2017 of the closure, I've been working on the mitigation of the loss. So there's different things that are going on. We were able to recently have an agreement with Holtec, the company that should be purchasing it next month. So for next year's budget, we were going to get 0, but we've negotiated $1.2 million. So that gives us a little financial stability for next year's budget. Also in the agreement are provisions for the local roads, if there's damage to the local roads. Plus there's a provision for expedited release of parcels of property. So we have to look at things that will help us, our tax base. So development will help our tax base. So if the property could be released, parcels of property that they don't need, that will help us with our tax base.
So why were the opponents in this case so successful? I know fear sells. There's the old line in the newspapers business: if it bleeds, it leads. Nobody ever sold newspapers by saying everything's going to be okay. Instead, it's the boogeyman is at the door. But
it was years.
Why were these groups so successful in selling this idea about fear when the data shows that nuclear is the safest form of generation? Why? What allowed them? What fueled their? Why were they so successful in selling fear? And then what was in it for the organizations? What did they get out of this?
They're very organized. They've been doing this for years. So I mentioned to you in the 90s, these were the same groups that were beating the drum to close Indian Point. And they're just, they're very organized. They're really a strong group, and they know how to be politically connected to the politicians and sell their thoughts to them.
But it's not just the politicians, right? It's not just that they're whispering in the ear of the governor. It's that they're they're convincing the public of this. So, I mean, this has been one of the
They
issues for
didn't convince our local community. Our local communities, you know, and not just the village of Buchanan, town of Cortland, in the area. Of course, there's some people who are against, you know, that were afraid of the plant. But, you know, I lived there my whole life. I never feared that plant. And maybe it helped me more because I was able to go in to see, you know, how the plant operated. So, and I just think for the nuclear industry, I think it's so important that somehow people are educated, and not by looking on the internet and looking up things that have happened. And, you know, that's not an education. That's not it. So it's behooves the communities to really understand what nuclear is. And if you want your nuclear power plant there, you need to fight for it.
Well, let's talk about that. And before we go further, just a reminder: my guest is Mayor Theresa Knickerbocker. She's the mayor of Buchanan, the mayor of the village of Buchanan, New York, which has been the host community for the Indian Point Energy Center in New York, which closed on April 30th. And so I'm having her here on Indian Point Blackout Week. The issues, though, that I think are key now, and that we talked about this before we started recording, was you said you don't have a specific call to action. The plant is being closed now, but you wanted to get other people in other communities that are facing the closure of nuclear plants. What's your message to them? Because there are two plants that are slated for closure this year in Illinois, the Byron and Dresden plants. So you do have a call to action. What's your advice to those communities around those plants, including Diablo Canyon in California? What's your advice to them?
I think the best advice, you know, lessons learned. I think what you really need to do is you need to have your community educated. You need to push back for the statements that are made. You need to educate people what nuclear power is, and that it's not this big bad boogeyman that's going to kill you. You know, yes, we've seen in Fukushima, yes, there was a problem, the plant catastrophic, but the Indian Point power plant did not have the same operating system. So if you want to keep your nuclear power plant, now is the time, or it's been time that you have to educate the community. You have to just get people behind you and fight this.
And you say get people behind you and fight it, and in what ways? Say, reminding them that nuclear is safe, that this is important for taxes. Give me the 3 or 4 things that you'd tell them if they're going to stand up and do what you say. What are those
I think they
points?
they need to go to these meetings, the NRC meetings. I think they need to be there in force. I think they need to voice their opinion. I think they need to let people know that they want to keep this in their community. And it just has to be a show of strength. And just like the anti-groups, you have to write letters, you just have to do all these things and be organized to fight for the plant. Over the years, I've gone to NRC meetings, and unfortunately, I have not seen a lot of the community show up. But I think in retrospect, I don't think people thought that these plants would be closed before their time. The plants were still supposed to be operational into the 2030 timeframe, the 2030 timeframe. I'm sorry, I apologize. But so I think people didn't think that it would happen. So that was part of the problem.
You know, I can identify with that because we met back in 2018, and I thought, oh, this, surely they're going to come to their senses before this shuts down. Did you feel the same way, that somehow, yeah, I've heard what they've said, but no, they're gonna realize this is a bad idea and that they're going to change their mind?
No, I never felt that way. The agreement that was made was pretty ironclad. I know some of the pro-nuclear people felt that they could still keep the plant open, and what can we do to keep it open? But it was such a tight agreement, and really the only way for the plant to remain open was 2 things. One was if there was a war, and we don't want to see that. So that's, and that would only keep the plant open 2 more years. The other way was if there was an energy, like they couldn't replace the energy, then they would keep it open for 2 more years. But that was the agreement. That was it. So
Only
to
an
me,
extension of
I
two
understood it
years.
was done. It was over.
So, and I think that that's another key point that you mentioned that, and it's something that I've reported on, was that the plant had a lot of life left in it. It could have, the licenses could have been extended, and yet
Sure.
they were extended slightly to meet the closure date. But in touring the plant, I remember one of the people, Brian Van Gore, showed me around. He said, "Oh yeah, we could run this thing for decades." And he made a really interesting comment when we were walking around. He said, "As I've walked around this plant, I marvel at how well designed it was, and that the people who put this together put a lot of thought into it, and that it was something that he thought about on a regular basis. That wow, they really thought about how to make this thing last." And that to me is the. I interviewed Mark Nelson. He was on the podcast that we previously aired, and he said that was part of what made the event on Friday so gripping to him, was that it felt like a premature death, and he
Yeah.
called it a funeral. Did you feel that way?
Yeah, I would liken it to that. I would definitely liken it to that. And it was, I felt we needed to do that. I think it was something the community needed to go through to let go of what was happening. But I have seen pictures. I mean, I was a little girl when the plant was being built, and when the first reactor went online. So I don't really remember it, but I do know the people that built that plant. Over the years, I've known them. Hardworking, honest, dedicated people, very proud of their work. That plant, it's sad it's coming down because that plant is well built. I had somebody, Joe Tindano, who was one of the concrete foremans over there, show me the pictures of Unit 3 being built. And it's just amazing looking at those pictures. I mean, I'm not a contractor, but these people, you're right, put a lot of thought into it. They had their heart and soul into it. These were local union people that were working there. These are local from throughout the community, professionals that built that plant, rock solid, so it just, and then, you think about it, these people lived in the community. They didn't fear that plant at all because they knew how well built that plant was.
I'll follow up on that because you mentioned the union, the unions and the union force, the workforce there, the utility workers, United Utility Workers of America. I'm getting that name wrong, but that the part that to me that makes me so cynical about this closure. To use Lily Tomlin's line, no matter how cynical I get, I can't keep up. But this, you hear the Governor Cuomo, you hear President Biden saying, well, we're going to create great union jobs for these energy projects of the future. And yet you have hundreds of union jobs that exist now that are being eliminated for the possibility, not the guarantee, the possibility that you might have some union jobs created sometime in the future somewhere. And I know that one of the union reps spoke on Friday. What's the feeling among the union the union workers in Buchanan and who work at the plant? Is there a feeling of betrayal? How are they seeing this in terms of their own their jobs as union men, and also what the politicians have told them?
I think they're, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they're feeling, hopeful that there will be jobs with the decommissioning of the plant for the local unions. I mean, you know what? I would like to see, and they're going to be working, but the local people who worked building that plant or their families built that plant, who better would know those plants than the families of the people who work there? So we want to have that because, these people know this plant. You can't be bringing people in from all over the country. These people in the local communities know that plant best. But I don't know, going down the road, there's going to be plenty of jobs. It's going to take 10 to 12, maybe 15 years for the decommissioning. So for over the decommissioning years, there'll be jobs. Going forward with the renewables, who knows? There's just no guarantees there. And will they pay the same? Will they pay the same?
Or will they last as long?
Or will they last as long? Yeah, we don't know. That's the big question.
So why are the renewables, this lure of renewables, why is that in your view? I mean, you've thought about these issues for a long time now. You've been the mayor, you said, since 2014, so now
Yes.
seven years. So you've known about the arguments on both sides. You said you're adamantly pro-nuclear now. You've talked about the fear-mongering of nuclear, this misplaced fear. Why is this attraction of renewables so strong in your mind? Or do you believe, why do you, or do you see that?
I think they think that that's the answer. And like I said before, nobody is against renewables. But you know what? When we talk about nuclear power, we're talking reliable power. So we're not completely seeing reliable power with the renewables, nor are we seeing the replacement of nuclear power with the renewables. Like I said, maybe 10 years down the road, maybe you'll see that. I don't know. But another thing that concerns me nationwide, and in my community, is security. If we can't have reliable power, that concerns me. That goes to our nation's security. And I don't want to see us going backwards here and becoming a third world country.
That's so quaint. No, but I'm with you. I think the reliability part of this, I think, as I look at it, I think, well, okay, even if you don't care about the CO2, even if you don't care about the union jobs, you should care about the reliability and the fuel diversity, right? That these are important attributes for any electric grid. And I've written a lot about electric grids, gone around the world looking at electric grids, and they're very fragile and they can fail. And I've seen it here myself in Texas and been blacked out. And
that's right. You live in Texas. So yes, you just experienced that, didn't you?
I did. So that issue of security, I think, is one that, and you put it in the terms of national security. I think you did, and this is an important, for one of the most important cities in the entire country, to get 25% of its electricity from one plant, and now just it's gone. So, have you had conversations with people about that issue, about the reliability with the grid workers or any other people in your region?
People are concerned. They're concerned about blackouts. So, that's something out of my control. But I always knew that Indian Point had reliable power, no matter what kind of storms came. Sandy, remember how bad Sandy was? Yeah, so we were, especially in the village of Buchanan, we had our lights on, or if we went out for a day or something like that. So let me tell you, when it's in the middle of the winter time, you want your power on. And I see another thing with the antis. One of the ways that they're thinking that we can overcome if there's a shortage in power is conservation. And I've said this before. Let me tell you, in the middle of the winter, I am not lowering my heat. Okay, just not doing it. In the middle of the summertime, my air conditioner's going on. I am not conserving. Absolutely not. So, we've been told that the replacement power will be there, with the 2 gas-fired plants that are going up. And then, of course, there's the, what do they call them, like peaker plants, the gas-fired peaker plants, if they need more energy and stuff. But once again, we're talking about carbon emissions.
And then that is maybe of all the issues that makes me the most cynical, is the environmental groups who argued for the closure of this plant are adamantly active in terms of climate politics, and that we're facing a climate crisis, and yet they closed a plant, 2 gigawatts of zero carbon electricity generation capacity. That to me just makes no sense at all. Have you talked with any of these activists and talked about it in those terms, in terms of, well, how can you support
No,
this?
I really haven't had that conversation. The conversations I've had with them in the past is, they thought that the solar panels would be great all over the Indian Point property. And I said, absolutely not. That's beautiful property, and we're not covering it up with solar panels.
Can I interrupt you there? So why?
Sure, absolutely.
You said absolutely not. We're not covering it with solar panels. Why not?
Because it's a beautiful piece of property located on the Hudson River. It's you know, you were there, you saw the property. It's absolutely gorgeous. And why are we just throwing solar panels on it? But not only that, I don't believe that even if we covered every inch of that property, we could replace the energy from unit 2 and 3.
Well, I think that's verifiable, and the solar panels I don't think work very well at night. At least that's what I've been told. I'm not
No,
sure.
they usually don't. No. And
Well,
I don't think we're there with battery storage yet. We're not there. So if Indian Point, I think it's premature that it was closed, but if it continued for a few more years, 5 years, 10 years, you know, I don't know. I don't have that answer. But if there was some type of reliable to go to, you know, from there to that and not go to gas, I think maybe people could accept it a little better.
But instead, it's going to be, and I think one of the union representatives said, we're closing it and we're not getting anything in return.
No.
So it's being replaced, and there's nothing there that's reliable. I mean, the gas-fired generation, the independent system operators say, well, that's reliable, but we've also seen what can happen with too much reliance on gas, and we saw that in Texas. We saw it in Oklahoma as well, just in February, where too much reliance on natural gas resulted in very high prices and in some cases blackouts.
Yeah, I saw some of the Texas bills and I was like, oh my God, my heart went out to the people in Texas. I just, yeah, not good, not good. So you never with anything want to put all your eggs in one basket. You know, so renewables, you know, there should be a percentage of renewables. There should be a percentage of nuclear. If you want to have backup, if there's a problem with gas as a backup, you know, not to rely on that, you know, so it should be some type of a mixing up what's, you know, the whole portfolio of that.
So what's next for you, Mayor? You've been in office now 7 years. Are you going to run again? Are you? Have you?
I'd like to run again. I'd like to finish the mitigation of what I've worked on. I've already spoken about, you know, Holtec, working with them, with you know, going forward. There's the New York State has a cessation fund that we're eligible for 7 years, which is more of a bridge to get us hopefully into development and doing other things to replace. One of the other things I have been working with, and I really hope Congress and Senate understands how important this is to the communities that are losing nuclear power plants, is the Stranded Act. It is so important for us. The Department of Energy is responsible for the spent fuel. In the end, we will have at the Indian Point property 125 spent fuel casks that the Department of Energy is responsible for. There was an agreement made that the Department of Energy would dispose of that. We should no way in hell be a storage facility for the Department of Energy. And if we are, this is where the Stranded Act comes in, then the community should be compensated for that. So I know I've worked with people like Scott Nemec and other people throughout the country, you know, in a similar position as we are. And, you know, they have been working, you know, very hard to get this pushed through. But I can't stress enough to the Congress and the Senate that this is really important to these communities that have stranded nuclear waste. Because even if that property, think about this, even if that property is completely decommissioned, it's going to be 2 pads of 100 with 125. We can't develop that property. We can't develop around it. But that was the agreement. They were going to find a final repository. So do I think that policy, looking back now, do I think that policy of leaving the spent fuel throughout the country was wrong? Yes. Other countries refurbish the spent fuel. We had a policy, I believe it started with Jimmy Carter, that the spent fuel was left in the cask and to find a permanent repository. Well, that hasn't happened. So it's imperative that these, you know, our government gets this together and figures out, are you going to find a final repository, which was supposed to be Yucca Mountain, but there's pushback. So I understand that from those people. They don't, not in my backyard, the NIMBY. I get that. But it's not fair to all these different communities around the country to have this spent fuel sitting on these pads. It has to be monitored. There has to be security. So it's time for the Department of Energy to either compensate these communities or get this stuff out of the communities, one or the other. Could you tell I'm a little angry about that?
I can tell. I can indeed. Well, so let me just ask you one last thing. A couple last things, if you don't mind, Mayor. And I appreciate your time. And my guest is Mayor Theresa Knickerbocker. She's the mayor of the village of Buchanan, New York, in beautiful Westchester County. She's has a starring role, by the way, in Juice: How Electricity Explains the World, our new documentary, which you can watch on the Roku channel. Her call to action is just to other nuclear communities around the country, saying if you have nuclear plants and you want to save them, you better get busy now. So, Mayor, how do you keep your cynicism in check after watching this debacle? And I'm going to call it a debacle, and I'm cynical about it, and it makes me mad. It makes me sad. It makes me even more cynical about our politicians, particularly at the national level, who say one thing and then do another. If they talk about climate crisis, they talk about this an existential crisis. We have to do something, and yet Indian Point closes and they say nothing. How do you keep your cynicism in check? Because mine runs amok.
It's very difficult. This must have aged me like 100 years, going through this whole thing, worrying about the community, many sleepless nights, just trying to figure out how we're going to survive with, financially. It breaks my heart. The people that have lost their jobs. Just looking at their faces, it was too much the other day, but very dedicated people, and really had their heart and soul into the operation of that plant. The only thing I think that keeps me from being extremely cynical is you really somehow, you just have to stay focused on what needs to be done. There's a lot that needs to be done when you're going to get into a closure of a power plant, your largest employer, your largest taxpayer. So I think just staying focused on the community and helping them to get through it. And you know what? One thing if I didn't have a sense of humor, I don't know where I would be right now. I just somehow, I try to have a sense of humor, and I try to look for the light at the end of the tunnel. It was sad for the plant to close. I'm not happy about it. Obviously, I'm very unhappy about it. But, I have to look to the future also. I have to stay hopeful for the community. I have to look how we are going to reinvent ourselves. So the opportunity to possibly have some of the property released, expedited release, gives me a little hope that we can help, mitigate the loss. We're looking more for a mixed use to replace. We're not looking to be into manufacturing again. But, I just, I know some people aren't going to be happy but there's the new generation nuclear. You never know, maybe some way down the road there, who knows? Because right across the street from Indian Point, we have the switch yard for Con Edison, where the power would go into that switch yard and it would shoot down county and shoot into New York City. So you never know what the future holds for you. But it just gives me a glimmer of hope that, maybe there can be some development on this beautiful property, not next to there's decommissioning that has to happen. Okay, that has to happen. But there are parcels that are on the outskirts, the north and the south areas, that could do some type of potential development. We did have a company that came in that manufactures the windmills, and they wanted to, in the town of Cortland property, but they were going to eventually come into ours. And we said, absolutely not. It was manufacturing. It wasn't many jobs, and it would basically take up most of the property. So we were not interested in that.
All right. Well, Mayor, you've been kind with your time, and I think we covered the main issues here. And I thank you for your time, and I know
No,
it's a
thank you,
hard time.
Robert. As always, you do a great job at getting the information out. Much appreciated.
Well, I appreciate your work. I know it's a hard job. The best to you and all of your constituents in Buchanan. If you want to follow up on Mayor Knickerbocker, you can visit on the web. You can find the village of Buchanan. It's a beautiful small town, and I was pleased to be there a few years ago. Mayor, the best to you. And your constituents in Buchanan, and to all of you people in podcast land, thanks for tuning in. This has been another episode of Indian Point Blackout Week. There are more episodes coming to mark the closure of what is arguably one of the most important nuclear plants in America, a plant that should not have been closed, but was for a lot of reasons, none of which are any good. Anyway, we'll tune in again. We'll have another episode talking about this. So tune in next time. Again, thank you, Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Robert.